So after moving on from the letters to Paul, today we're continuing with the second letter of Peter and the book of Jude, which were very interrelated. So both books address the issue of false spiritual leaders in the church who were drawing people away from Christ. And that doesn't seem too different from what's happening today, does it? Now, these false leaders had convinced the people that there was no judgment for sin and rebellion, but obviously that wasn't right. But both writers gave examples of how God had judged sin and rebellion in the Old Testament to let people know that that wasn't true. What stood out for me in 2 Peter 2, 5-9 was that in judgment and destruction, God always reserved a remnant, because in those chapters they talk about the time of Noah when there was destruction. God saved Noah and his family. In Sodom and Gomorrah, God saved Lot. So even in all of that, there's always preservation for God's remnant. So Peter wrote this letter while living in Rome under the rule of Governor Nero, who we have already said was a great persecutor of Christians. So he was killing Christians during that time. He was actually renowned for that. And Peter knew that he was facing death at the time that he wrote this letter. But the letter was an encouragement to the Christians to hold steadfastly to the truth, no matter what. Now, I learned from this book that as Christians, there are 7 virtues that we need to grow in if we are to be fruitful and have an effective in our knowledge of God. And these are faith, virtue, knowledge, self-control, steadfastness, godliness, brotherly affection, and love. It does sound very similar to the fruits of the Spirit. So to me, I felt like it was like growing in that, or growing or making sure that the fruits of the Spirit are evident in our lives. Now, the biggest praise to false teaching, or the biggest people who have fallen prey to false teaching I saw were what he called unsteady souls. And when I read that, the first thing that came to my mind was that saying that says that you stand for something or you fall for anything. So unsteadiness obviously speaks about being oscillating or being here and there. So it's really just about standing for something so that you don't fall prey. Peter's warning about the backsliding was very, very key, and that was in chapter 2, verses 21-22. And it appears that the faith of those backsliders are worse than those who never knew the way to righteousness, which is Jesus in the first place. So it's better to stand your ground, and just like I said, don't be an unsteady soul. So God's time frame is so different from us. I remember the first time I heard it, I was a child. 1,000 years is like a day to the Lord, and a day like 1,000 years. And it just shows that, we can't judge our timelines here on earth or our time frames based on what we know. It's it's just light years, literally light years, thousands of years apart. Now, according to Peter, his perspective was that the earth's time clock is ticking and it will come to an end soon. And the whole book encourages us to have an eternal perspective in life, not to be looking at things temporarily or looking at things according to our time frames. Now, apparently, they said Peter died shortly after this letter by crucifixion. I remember that Jesus had told him that in John 29, Jesus had spoken about that. But then apparently, from what they said, that he refused to be crucified the same way as Jesus did, so he was crucified upside down. Now, Jude, the other book that we read, Jude 1. Jude was the brother of Jesus and James, who initially didn't believe in him. So I read this book with that at the back of my mind, that this was a guy that once upon a time did not even believe in his brother, but now he was here giving true testimonies. And one of the things that stood out to me in this letter that he wrote to the Christians, where he told them that their life was a battleground. When he says, when we decide to follow Jesus, we invite attack from the world. But then in his letter, he was letting them know that the attack wasn't only from the world, but within the church at the same time. And I thought about it and I was like, yeah, that's probably not too different in this day and age, because the church isn't all full of Christians and people who believe in God. They're actually, antichrist people in the church as well. So I found out that there were some similarities between Peter's letter and Jude's letter. I could see, some similarities. And in verse 8 to 10, I found it very interesting that Jude quoted the book of Enoch. So I did a bit of research, and there are some books in the Bible that didn't make it into this canon, that didn't make it into the, become canonized to make it into this Bible. But there are some books that exist, and I've actually actively started to read them. I'm not going to share anything about them because I don't know that much about them. I've heard that you should just read them as stories and not take them as scripture. But I've read a few, and this book of Enoch apparently is one of them. And then the lesson that he shared was that no one has authority to pronounce judgment on anyone. We must only rely on God's authority. And when I say the book of, remember Enoch was the guy who never died. Him and Isaiah were the only two people in the Bible. Did I say Isaiah? I'm sorry. Him and Elijah. Much is spreading rumors. Elijah were the only two people who never died. They were taken off. They were raptured. And so that's who Enoch is. So let me share with you now my hashtag getting to know God lesson. Jesus is God the Son, and he has always existed. I'm sure you're like, yes, we know this, right? Yes. But Jude, his at first non-believing brother, actually acknowledged this. And I think that gives more weight behind it in verse 5, when he said that it was Jesus who rescued the Israelites from Egypt. And remember that Jesus hadn't really shown up on the scene. This was like years and years before him. But imagine for his brother to say that, it really puts weight behind it to say he truly believed. Now, thank you for joining me. Tomorrow, I'll be sharing lessons from 1 John. And I look forward to, being able to do that with you here, God willing. Thank you for joining me. Have a wonderful day.